All right, so with criminal psychology, we're going to talk a little bit about the brain. Um, the first part of the brain is going to be our cerebral cortex. This is our frontal lobe, which is directly behind your forehead, as noted in green. It's the most anterior, right under your forehead. The functions of your frontal lobe is basically how we know what we're doing within our environment. So our consciousness is here. Um, your judgment is here. So where you're conscious of other people, conscious of what you're doing, how it affects others. Um, it initiates your activity in response to your environment. So if it's raining, maybe you put your hood up, or you're like, I'm gonna run to get to my vehicle, things like that. It controls our emotional response to different stimuli. Um, so maybe you know that if something sad happens, you cry or you feel upset, or you see something happen, you get angry. That response would be in your frontal lobe. It also controls our expressive language and assigns meaning to words that we choose with word associations. So it kind of connects our emotions to put it in words overall. And it's also our memory for our habits and our motor abilities. So we're going to talk about what happens if you damage this part of the brain. So if you damage your frontal lobe, or if your frontal lobe was never developed fully at birth, um, you could have a loss of simple movement of body parts, so it can cause paralysis. You might have an inability to plan a sequence of complex movements needed to complete multi-step tasks. So it affects your sequencing. So maybe making coffee. Um, Maybe you know that you need to turn on the coffee pot. You need to fill it with water. You need to put either coffee grounds or a K-cup in. You need to put the carafe or a cup underneath it. What buttons do you hit to make it dispense coffee? All of that is a sequencing process. So if you have damage to your frontal lobe, maybe you do things out of order. You turn it on and hit start before you've put the coffee in, things like that. It can have a loss of spontaneity and interacting with others. Um, so it basically affects how you interact with others, how you respond in conversation, things like that. You have a loss of flexibility in thinking, so you're unable to see other people's viewpoints, unable to have a discussion, change your thought process. You're going to be very one-minded about this. You might have a persistence of a single thought, so you're going to be very like task-oriented. Um, you're going to think about one thing at a time and one thing only. You might have an ability to focus on a task other than what you want to do. So this might be where you're unable to focus on doing the dishes because you're focused on watching TV or focused on your phone or something like that. You could have mood changes. So some people, if they damage their frontal lobe, they're easy to anger. Um, they don't have the same range of emotional response as they normally would. Changes in social behavior. So maybe you were very social and now you're very antisocial. It could actually change your personality, and you might have difficulty with problem solving, where you just cannot simply figure out any type of problem. You might also have an inability to express language, so you can't put your thoughts into words. Next we go to our parietal lobe. This is directly behind the frontal lobes. This is going to be at the top of your head but near the back. Functions for our parietal lobe. This is our location for our visual attention, of what's going to draw our eye. Our location for our touch perception. So if you touch something hot, you recognize that it's hot and you pull your hand back, things like that. Our goal-directed voluntary movements. So this may be reaching out to grab an object, things like that, and manipulation of those objects. Also integration of different senses that allow for understanding of a single concept. So this is where maybe you're cooking eggs. You see them cooking, you might hear them cooking, you might smell them. All of those senses are going to come together in the parietal lobe. Issues with our parietal lobe. You might have an inability to attend to more than one object at a time. So you can't pick up two objects at a time. You have to focus on one only. You might be unable to name objects. So you might see a chair, you know it's a chair, but you can't actually name it as a chair. You might not be able to find words for writing. You might also have issues reading. So any issues with dyslexia and stuff are going to be located in the parietal lobe. If you have difficulty drawing objects or distinguishing from left to right or difficulty with math, all that is going to be in your parietal lobe. It's that manipulation of objects and numbers. You might have a lack of awareness of certain body parts in your surrounding space. So you may extend your arm out, but you don't realize that it's too close to a wall or too close to another person and end up accidentally hitting it. You could have difficulties in self-care. So these people may not understand if they're not using proper hygiene, things like that, or inability to focus visual attention. You're also going to have issues with hand and eye coordination. Then we get to our occipital lobe. This is at the very back of your head. The whole purpose of that occipital lobe is your vision. So it is going to be attached with nerves directly to your eyes. If you have issues with your occipital lobe, you could have defects in vision. So if you're blind in a certain eye or color blindness, blurriness, anything like that could be attached to issues with your occipital lobe. Difficulty locating objects in your environment. So maybe you have 20 objects and it's like pick up the pen. You may not be able to find the pen. There's just too many objects there for you to focus your vision. You might have difficulty identifying colors, so that could be with color blindness as well. It could produce hallucinations, or you may start seeing different objects that are not there. You can have word blindness, so you can't recognize a word. You see it, but you cannot actually put the letters together to form a word. You might have difficulty recognizing drawn objects, and the inability to recognize movement of an object. So you see that it's there, but you don't notice that it's not in its previous location. So people with issues in their occipital lobe may have difficulties reading and writing. Next, we get to our temporal lobe. This is on either side of your head, so there are actually two lobes. This is going to be right above your ears. So think of your temple on your forehead. It starts there and extends backwards. The purpose of your temporal lobes are for hearing ability, your memory acquisition, so memory can be stored here, and some visual perceptions. Also, your ability to categorize objects is going to be in your temporal lobe. So anyone that has issues with their temporal lobe might have difficulty recognizing faces, difficulty understanding spoken words. So they hear someone talking, but they're not able to form the words that the person is saying. You might have selective attention to what you see and hear. So you may not hear everything, you may only pick up on certain things. Difficulty with identification of and verbalization of objects. So yet again, you may not be able to see an object, name it, or recognize it as that object initially. You could have short-term memory loss. It can interfere with your long-term memory because your short-term memory has to be converted into long-term memory. So if you have short-term memory loss, those memories cannot be converted into long-term memory. You might have increased or decreased interest in sexual behavior, an inability to categorize objects, and in specifics, if you have a right lobe damage, it can cause persistent talking. And you can also have increased aggressive behavior with temporal lobe problems. So some of these you'll notice, particularly with the short-term memory loss and stuff, a lot of these are symptoms of concussions as well, because concussions can cause temporary damage to those temporal lobes. So here you kind of see all the different parts of the brain. Ones that we did not specifically get into are actually underneath that are going to attach to your spinal column. We have the cerebellum, which is located in pink, and then your brainstem in orange. Those do not really serve a function in terms of memory, vision, anything like that, but it is your connectivity for your nerves going into your spine, which will help aid in movement and things like that. All right, that is where we are stopping for today.